I never believed in ghosts until the day I found the barn my husband had hidden from me for 43 years. It stood there, swallowed by ivy and silence, at the farthest edge of our property. A place I'd been told was nothing but wild bramble and rattlesnake territory. But it was the stallion that made my blood run cold. Midnight black, eyes like burning coals, standing guard at the entrance, as if he'd been waiting for me his entire life. The horse wouldn't let anyone near, not the farmhands, not the neighbors, not even animal control, only me. And when I finally stepped inside that barn, I understood why my husband had taken his secrets to the grave. Before I tell you what I found inside that hidden barn, I need to know something. Have you ever discovered a truth about someone you loved that completely rewrote your understanding of who they were? Maybe it was after they were gone, when you stumbled across a letter, a photograph, a locked box that changed everything you thought you knew. Because that's what happened to me, and I'm still trying to make sense of it. If you've ever experienced something like that, or if you're just as curious as I was about what my husband was hiding, hit that like button right now, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I read every single one, and honestly, knowing I'm not alone in this helps more than you'd think. Now, let me take you back to where this all began, to the day I became a widow, and the mystery started to unfold. My name is Adelaide. I'm 71 years old, and up until 6 months ago, I thought I knew every inch of the land my husband and I had called home for over 4 decades. 87 acres of rolling Oklahoma prairie, dotted with oak trees older than our marriage, a creek that ran silver in the spring, and a farmhouse that had witnessed every season of our life together. My husband's name was Theodore. Everyone called him Teddy. He died on a Tuesday morning in late September, quietly, in his sleep, the way he'd done most things in life, without fuss, without drama. The doctor said it was his heart. I said it was because he'd worked himself to the bone his entire life and finally just stopped. We'd met when I was 26, working as a secretary at the county courthouse. Teddy had come in to file some paperwork for the property he'd just purchased, this very land, and he'd smiled at me with those soft brown eyes and asked if I knew anything about raising cattle. I didn't, but I learned. We both did. We built this life with our bare hands. 2 people who didn't know the first thing about farming, but were stubborn enough to figure it out. We never had children. That was a sorrow we carried quietly between us, the kind that doesn't go away, but eventually finds a place to settle. Instead, we poured ourselves into the land, into the animals, into each other. Teddy wasn't a complicated man. He liked his coffee black, his mornings early, and his evenings on the porch with the sun setting behind the west pasture. He read westerns and listened to old country radio and fixed things with duct tape and prayer. He was steady, reliable, predictable even. Or so I thought. The first strange thing happened 3 days after the funeral. I was going through Teddy's desk, slowly because every drawer felt like opening a vein, when I found a lockbox I'd never seen before. It was small, metal, scratched at the edges like it had been opened and closed 1,000 times. There was no key. I almost left it alone. Almost convinced myself it was just old tax documents or warranty papers for equipment we didn't own anymore. But something about the weight of it, the way it had been tucked in the very back of the bottom drawer, underneath a stack of livestock auction catalogs from 1987, something told me to look. I took a screwdriver to the lock. It popped open easier than I expected. Inside, there were 3 things: a faded black and white photograph of a horse, a ring of keys I didn't recognize, and a handwritten note on a scrap of paper that said, in Teddy's unmistakable scrawl, "North Fence. Past the cottonwoods, forgive me." That was it. No explanation, no context, just forgive me. I stared at that note for a long time, my heart doing something strange in my chest, half grief, half fear. Because in 43 years of marriage, Teddy had never asked me to forgive him for anything. He wasn't the type to keep secrets. He wasn't the type to hide things, or so I'd believed. I looked at the photograph again. The horse was enormous, muscular, wild-looking even in the stillness of the image. A stallion, clearly. His coat was so dark it seemed to drink the light, and behind him, barely visible in the background, was the edge of a structure, wooden, weathered, half hidden by trees. A barn. I'd never seen that barn before in my life. The next morning I went looking for it. The north fence was a part of the property I rarely visited. Teddy had always told me it was too overgrown, too rocky, too dangerous. Nothing out there but snakes and thorns, he'd say. No point going that way. And I'd believed him. Why wouldn't I? But now, walking through the tall grass with that ring of keys in my coat pocket and the photograph clutched in my hand, I realized how convenient that had been, how I'd never questioned it, how easily I'd accepted the boundaries he'd set. The cottonwoods were old and massive, their bark scarred and splitting. Beyond them, the land dipped into a shallow ravine, thick with brush and wild grapevine. I almost turned back twice, once when I tripped over a root and scraped my knee, and again when I heard something rustling in the underbrush that sounded far too large to be a rabbit. But I kept going, and then I saw it. The barn rose out of the landscape, like a ghost. It was half swallowed by Virginia creeper and honeysuckle, the roof sagging in the middle, the wood darkened by decades of weather. It looked abandoned, forgotten, but it wasn't, because standing in front of the double doors, as still as a statue, was the horse from the photograph. He was real, he was alive, and he was staring directly at me. I froze. I'd been around horses my entire adult life. We'd kept a few over the years for ranch work, gentle creatures with calm eyes and steady temperaments. But this animal was different. Everything about him radiated power. The arch of his neck, the flare of his nostrils, the way his muscles coiled beneath his coat like he was carved from stone. He didn't move, didn't make a sound, just watched me with those black, bottomless eyes. "Easy," I whispered. Though I wasn't sure if I was talking to him or to myself. I took a step forward, then another. The stallion's ears flicked back, and for a moment I thought he might charge. But he didn't. He just stood there, blocking the barn entrance like a sentinel. "I'm not here to hurt you," I said, my voice shaking. I need to see inside." I don't know why I thought talking to a horse would help, but something in his gaze shifted, just barely, and he took a single step to the side. Not much, just enough. My hands were trembling as I pulled the ring of keys from my pocket. There were 4 of them, old and rusted. I tried the first one in the heavy padlock that hung from the barn doors. It didn't fit, neither did the second. The third key slid in smoothly, and when I turned it, the lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo across the entire property. The stallion didn't move, didn't try to stop me. He just watched. I pulled the doors open, and the smell hit me first. Hay and leather and something else, something faintly sweet and sad. The interior was dim, sliced through with thin beams of light from cracks in the walls. And then I saw what Teddy had been hiding. The barn was filled with paintings, not just a few, hundreds of them. They covered every wall, stacked in corners, leaning against posts and beams. Oils, watercolors, sketches, landscapes and portraits and abstract bursts of color that took my breath away. Some were signed in the corner with initials I didn't recognize. Others were dated 1981, 1993, 2004, 2019. And in the center of the barn, on an easel beneath a dusty skylight, was an unfinished portrait of a woman. She was young, maybe 30, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right through me. Beautiful in a way that was quiet and devastating. I'd never seen her before in my life, but Teddy had painted her with a tenderness that made my chest ache. I stood there in the silence, surrounded by my husband's secret life, and realized I didn't know him at all. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that portrait. Time felt strange, elastic. The barn seemed to hold its breath around me. Eventually, I forced myself to move, to look closer. The paintings weren't just random. They told a story, or pieces of one, scattered and incomplete. There were landscapes of places I'd never been, seaside cliffs, dense forests, cities I didn't recognize. There were studies of hands, of light falling across fabric, of horses running wild. And there were portraits of the woman, dozens of them. Her face appeared again and again, rendered with a kind of reverence I'd only seen in museum paintings. Teddy had captured her laughing, sleeping, reading, staring out a window. In some, she was young. In others, older, lines beginning to crease the corners of her eyes. The most recent one was dated just 2 years ago. 2 years. That meant Teddy had been coming here painting her, long after we'd settled into what I thought was the quiet contentment of old age. I felt nauseous, betrayed, furious, but also confused, because there was something else in those paintings, a sadness, a longing that didn't fit the narrative forming in my head, the one where my husband had been living a double life, where I'd been a fool. I started searching the barn more carefully. There were shelves along one wall cluttered with paint supplies, brushes stiff with dried color, jars of murky water. And there, tucked between 2 cans of turpentine, I found a leather journal. My hands shook as I opened it. The first entry was dated June 14th, 1979. Met someone today who changed everything. Her name is Vivienne. She sees the world the way I do, in color and light and impossible beauty. For the first time in my life, I don't feel alone. I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding. The entries were sporadic, sometimes weeks or months apart. Teddy wrote about Vivienne, the way poets write about muses, with awe and wonder, and a kind of desperate gratitude. But he also wrote about me. Adelaide made pot roast tonight the way I like it. She doesn't know how much these small kindnesses mean to me. I wish I could tell her. I wish I could explain. I'm building a life with Adelaide, and it's a good life, solid, real. But there's a part of me that only exists when I paint, when I remember Vivienne's laugh, the way she saw me not as a farmer, but as an artist. I don't know how to reconcile these two versions of myself. The entries grew heavier, darker. Vivienne is sick. The doctors say there's nothing they can do. I can't go to her. I can't risk Adelaide finding out, but I'm dying inside. Every stroke of the brush is a prayer that she'll survive. She's gone. I wasn't there. I'll never forgive myself. That entry was dated March 3rd, 1998. I sat down hard on an old crate, the journal still open in my lap. Vivienne had been dead for almost 30 years, and Teddy had kept painting her, kept visiting this barn, kept carrying her with him in secret. I thought about all the times he'd disappeared for a few hours, claiming he needed to check fence lines or move cattle. I thought about the way he'd sometimes go quiet at dinner, staring at nothing, lost in thoughts he never shared. I'd always assumed he was just tired, just Teddy being Teddy, but he'd been mourning, grieving a woman I'd never known existed, and the worst part, the part that made tears finally spill down my cheeks, was that I understood. Not the secrecy, not the deception, but the love, because I'd seen the way he painted her, the way every brushstroke carried weight and memory, and an ache that never healed. Teddy had loved Vivienne the way artists love their impossible dreams, fiercely, hopelessly, forever. And he'd loved me too, differently maybe. But he'd loved me. I just didn't know if that was enough. I heard a sound behind me, a soft snort, and turned to find the stallion standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the late afternoon light. He'd followed me inside. "Who are you?" I whispered. "Why are you here?" The horse walked forward slowly, carefully, until he was standing beside me. Up close I could see the silver threading through his mane, the scars along his legs. He was old, older than I'd realized, and then I saw the nameplate nailed to the stall at the back of the barn. Apollo, Vivienne's horse. Teddy had kept him all these years. I reached out, half expecting Apollo to shy away, but he lowered his head and let me rest my hand against his neck. His coat was warm, solid, real. "You loved her too," I said softly. "Didn't you?" Apollo exhaled, long and slow, and I felt something in my chest crack open. The next few weeks passed in a haze. I couldn't stop thinking about the barn, about Vivienne, about the life Teddy had lived in the margins of ours. I told no one. Not my sister, not the neighbors, not even Pastor Flynn when he stopped by to check on me. How could I explain it? How could I put into words the strange grief I was carrying, not just for Teddy, but for a woman I'd never met, and for the version of my husband I'd never known? I went back to the barn every day. Sometimes I just sat there, surrounded by the paintings, trying to piece together the story. Other times, I read the journal cover to cover, searching for clues, for answers, for something that would make it all make sense. And Apollo was always there, a silent guardian. He'd let me brush him, feed him the apples I brought from the house, but he never strayed far from the barn. It was like he was tethered to it, to Vivian's memory, to Teddy's secret. One afternoon, as I was flipping through the journal for the third or fourth time, I found a loose page tucked into the back. It was a letter, written in Teddy's hand, but never sent. My dearest Vivian, I know you're gone. I know I should let you rest, but I can't stop painting you. I can't stop remembering the summer we spent at your father's ranch, the way you taught me to see the world through an artist's eyes. You gave me a gift I didn't know I needed, permission to be more than a farmer, more than what people expected. I met Adelaide 2 years after you left for Europe. She's kind, steady, everything I thought I wanted in a partner. And I do love her, but it's a different love, a quieter one. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been if you'd stayed, if you'd said yes when I asked you to marry me, instead of choosing your art, your freedom, your dreams. But then I remember what you told me that last night, that love isn't about possession. It's about honoring who someone truly is, even if it means letting them go. I let you go, Vivian, but I never stopped loving you. And when you came back years later, sick and frightened and alone, I couldn't turn you away. I couldn't let you die in some sterile hospital room surrounded by strangers. I built the barn for you. I brought Apollo here so you'd have something familiar. Something that reminded you of the person you were before the illness took everything. You spent your last 6 months painting with me, even when your hands shook too much to hold the brush steady. You told me stories about Venice and Paris and all the places you'd seen. You made me promise I'd keep creating, keep seeing beauty, even after you were gone. I've kept that promise, but I never told Adelaide. How could I? How could I explain that I'd harbored my first love in secret, that I'd built her a sanctuary on land that was supposed to be ours? I'm a coward, Vivian. I always have been, but I'm also grateful. For you, for Adelaide, for the strange, complicated gift of having loved 2 extraordinary women in one lifetime. I don't know if that makes me selfish or simply human. I don't know if Adelaide will ever forgive me, but I hope somehow you both understand. Yours always, Teddy. I read that letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. He'd brought Vivian here to die. He'd cared for her, painted with her, given her peace in her final months. And he'd carried the weight of that secret for nearly 3 decades. I felt so many things at once: anger, sorrow, betrayal, compassion. But mostly I felt tired of trying to reconcile the man I'd married with the man who'd written that letter. I looked up at Apollo, who was watching me with those ancient, knowing eyes. Did he do the right thing? I asked, keeping this from me? Apollo didn't answer, of course, but he walked over and rested his massive head against my shoulder, and I let myself cry into his mane. I started asking questions, carefully, quietly. I went to the county records office and searched for Vivian's name. It took 3 visits and help from a patient clerk named Naomi. But eventually I found her, Vivian Carpenter, born 1951, died 1998. Cause of death, ovarian cancer. There was an obituary in the local paper, brief and impersonal. Survived by no immediate family. No mention of Teddy. No mention of a great love or a hidden barn or a stallion named Apollo. I tracked down people who'd known her. Old ranchers, a retired art teacher, a woman who'd run the gallery in town 30 years ago. Most of them remembered Vivienne only vaguely. A firecracker, one man said. Talented as hell, but restless. Couldn't stay in one place long. Only one person, an elderly woman named Shirley, who'd been Vivienne's neighbor briefly in the early 90s, had anything substantial to say. She came back from Europe different, Shirley told me over tea in her cluttered living room. Quieter. Sick, I think, though she never said. She kept to herself mostly, but sometimes I'd see a man visiting her, tall, gentle-looking. They'd sit on her porch for hours, just talking. I always assumed he was a relative. "Did you ever learn his name?" I asked, my heart pounding. Shirley shook her head. "No, but he looked at her the way my late husband used to look at me, like she was the whole world." I thanked her and left, feeling hollowed out. Back at the barn, I started going through the paintings more methodically. There were dates on some of them, and I began arranging them chronologically, watching Vivienne age across canvas and paper. There were gaps, years where Teddy must not have painted her at all, when she was off living her life in distant cities. And then there was a sudden surge starting in 1997, dozens of paintings in quick succession, Vivienne looking frailer, thinner, but still radiant, still herself. I found sketches Teddy had done of the barn under construction. Notes about paint colors, measurements, plans for a skylight. He'd built this place with his own hands, in secret while I was, making dinner? Doing laundry? Living my small, unsuspecting life? The betrayal should have consumed me, and some days it did, but other days I'd sit in that barn and feel something else, a strange, reluctant admiration. Because Teddy had loved fiercely enough to build a sanctuary for a dying woman. He'd sacrificed his pride, his peace, maybe even his integrity, to give Vivienne dignity in her final months. And he'd protected me from it. Not because he didn't trust me, but because he knew it would hurt. He'd carried that pain alone. I thought about all the times I'd seen him come home tired, seen him stare at nothing, seen him grow quiet in ways I'd attributed to age or work or the general weight of living. He'd been holding Vivienne inside him all along, keeping her alive in the only way he knew how. One evening, as the sun was setting and casting long shadows across the barn floor, I had a realization. I wasn't angry at Teddy for loving Vivienne. I was angry that he hadn't trusted me enough to tell me, because if he'd come to me in 1997 and said, "Adelaide, someone I loved a long time ago is dying and I need to help her," I would have said yes. I would have understood. Maybe not easily, maybe not without hurt, but I would have understood because that's what love is, not ownership, not possession. But the choice to see someone fully, flaws and complications and impossible histories, and love them anyway. Teddy had never given me that choice, and that, more than anything, was what broke my heart. It was a cold morning in late March when everything changed. I'd gone to the barn as usual, bringing Apollo his breakfast and planning to spend a few hours sorting through more of Teddy's things. But when I arrived, Apollo was agitated, pacing, snorting, tossing his head in a way I'd never seen. "What's wrong?" I asked, approaching cautiously. He whinnied loudly and moved toward the back corner of the barn, where a tarp-covered shape sat that I'd assumed was just old furniture or equipment. Apollo stamped his hoof and looked at me expectantly. "All right," I said. "All right, I'll look." I pulled the tarp away and my breath caught. Underneath was a wooden chest, beautifully carved with intricate designs. Horses running, trees bending in wind, stars scattered across a night sky. It was locked, but there was one key left on Teddy's ring I hadn't used yet. My hands were shaking as I fit it into the lock. Inside the chest were more journals, not Teddy's this time, but Vivienne's. 5 of them, their covers worn and stained. And beneath those, wrapped carefully in silk, were letters. Dozens of them. Letters from Teddy to Vivienne, written over decades. Letters from Vivienne to Teddy, full of longing and art and philosophy and love. I sat down right there on the barn floor and started reading. The story that emerged was nothing like I'd imagined. Vivienne and Teddy had met when they were 23, both working summer jobs at a dude ranch in Colorado. They'd fallen in love immediately. The intense, all-consuming kind of love that feels like destiny. They talked about marriage, about building a life together. But Vivienne had been offered a scholarship to study art in Florence. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and Teddy, who just inherited his family's struggling farm, couldn't leave. They tried to make it work long distance, but eventually the distance became too much. Vivienne had chosen her art. Teddy had chosen the land. They'd written to each other for years, even after they'd both moved on. Vivienne to New York and Paris and Rome, Teddy to marriage and farming and the quiet life he'd built with me. The letters were full of what-ifs and do you remembers, and the kind of tenderness that comes from knowing someone at the soul level, even when life has pulled you in different directions. And then in 1997, Vivienne had written to say she was dying. She had no family, no partner, no one to care for her in her final months. She'd asked Teddy if she could come home, not to burden him, but just to be near someone who'd known her when she was young and whole. Teddy's response letter was in the chest too. "Come home, Viv. I'll take care of everything. You won't be alone, I promise." He'd built the barn in 6 weeks, working late into the night after I'd gone to bed. He'd brought Apollo from the ranch where Vivienne had boarded him. He'd created a space where she could paint, rest, be herself without the clinical coldness of hospice. And Vivienne's journals from those final months, God, they were beautiful and heartbreaking. She wrote about watching the sunset through the skylight, about Apollo nuzzling her hand when the pain got bad, about Teddy sitting with her for hours, not talking, just being present. She wrote about me too. Teddy talks about Adelaide sometimes. I can see how much he loves her. It's a different love than what we had, steadier and kinder. She sounds like a good woman. I hope she knows how lucky she is, and I hope if she ever finds out about me, she doesn't hate him. He's doing this out of compassion, not betrayal. That's just who Teddy is, someone who can't turn away from suffering, even when it costs him. In her final entry, dated 2 days before she died, Vivienne wrote, "I asked Teddy today if he regretted anything. He said no. He said he'd lived 2 good lives, one with me in memory, one with Adelaide in reality, and that made him richer than most men ever get to be. I believe him. I hope Adelaide believes it too someday. Tell her, Teddy, please. She deserves to know she was loved fully, not in spite of me, but alongside me. Love isn't a finite resource. It's the one thing that multiplies when you give it away." I closed the journal and pressed it against my chest, sobbing so hard I thought I might break apart. Apollo came and stood beside me, his warm bulk a comfort. And I understood finally what Teddy had been trying to tell me with that note. Forgive me, not for loving Vivienne, but for loving her in secret, for thinking he had to protect me from the complexity of his heart. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just sad. Sad that he'd carried this alone. Sad that we'd never had the conversation we should have had. Sad that fear had kept him silent. But I also felt something else, gratitude. Because in the end, Teddy had shown me that love doesn't have to be simple to be real, that you can hold multiple truths in your heart at once, that honoring someone's past doesn't diminish their present. He'd loved Vivienne. He'd loved me. Both things were true. And maybe that was enough. I spent the next month making peace with everything I'd learned. I read every letter, every journal entry. I studied every painting. I let myself feel all the complicated emotions, grief, jealousy, compassion, acceptance, and slowly something shifted inside me. I started painting. I hadn't picked up a brush since high school art class, and I was terrible at it. But there was something healing about it, about sitting in that barn, surrounded by Teddy's work and trying to capture the light filtering through the skylight, the curve of Apollo's neck, the wild prairie beyond the doors. Apollo seemed to approve. He'd stand nearby, patient and calm, like he was keeping me company. I also started writing letters of my own, to Teddy, to Vivienne, even to myself. Letters I'd never send but needed to write anyway. Letters that said all the things I wished I'd been brave enough to say when it mattered. Dear Teddy, I wish you'd trusted me. I wish you'd let me carry some of this with you. But I understand why you didn't. You were trying to protect me, and that was an act of love too, even if it was misguided. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just sorry we ran out of time before we could have this conversation for real. I forgive you, and I hope, wherever you are, you've forgiven yourself. Love always, Adelaide. One afternoon, I invited Naomi from the county office to visit. She'd been kind during my research, and I felt like I needed to share this with someone, to make it real by speaking it aloud. We sat in the barn, drinking lemonade, surrounded by decades of secret art. "My God," Naomi whispered, looking around. "This is incredible." I told her everything, the whole story, start to finish. When I was done, Naomi was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You know what I think? I think your husband was a coward and a hero at the same time. He did something beautiful and something wrong, and somehow both things are true." I nodded. "Yeah, that's exactly it. So what are you going to do now?" she asked. I looked at the paintings, at Apollo dozing in the corner, at the life Teddy had built in secret. "I'm going to honor it," I said. "All of it. His love for Vivian, his love for me. I'm going to stop trying to make it simple." Naomi smiled. "I think that's perfect." I turned the barn into a gallery, not a public one. I wasn't ready for that. But I invited people who'd known Teddy, people who'd known Vivian, people whose lives had been touched by either of them. I served coffee and cookies and let them wander through the space, seeing a side of these two people they'd never known existed. The reactions were mixed. Some people were scandalized. Others were moved to tears. A few didn't know what to make of it at all. But I didn't do it for them. I did it for Teddy and Vivian, to give their story the dignity of being seen. And I did it for me, to stop carrying secrets that were never mine to keep. Apollo stayed in the barn. I couldn't imagine him anywhere else. He was part of the story now, a living connection to everything that had happened. I visited him every day, brought him apples, brushed his coat until it shone. He was getting older, slower, stiffer in the mornings, but his eyes were still bright, still watching everything with that ancient wisdom. One day, as I was painting, badly, but with more confidence than before, I heard footsteps outside the barn. A young woman appeared in the doorway, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair and a backpack slung over one shoulder. "Can I help you?" I asked. She looked around, her eyes wide. Is this Vivian Carpenter's work?" My heart skipped. "Some of it, yes." "Did you know her?" The woman shook her head. "No, but she was my grandmother's best friend. My grandmother passed away last year, and in her things, I found letters from Vivian. She mentioned this place, a barn in Oklahoma where she spent her final months, where someone had given her the greatest gift." "What gift?" I asked, though I thought I knew. "The gift of being seen," the woman said softly, "of being loved exactly as she was, without judgment or condition." She walked further into the barn, studying the paintings. "My grandmother always said Vivian was the bravest person she knew, that she lived her life on her own terms, even when it was hard, even when it hurt. She was brave," I agreed, "and so was the man who loved her." The woman turned to me. "Are you Adelaide?" I nodded, surprised. "Vivienne wrote about you too," she said. "She said she hoped you'd understand someday, that you'd see love isn't about choosing one person over another, it's about making room for all the ways people touch our lives." Tears blurred my vision. "I do understand. It took me a while, but I do." The woman smiled. "Good, because I think that's what she would have wanted." We talked for a long time that day. She told me about her grandmother, about Vivian's wild adventures, about the art community that still remembered her decades later. And when she left, she hugged me and said, "Thank you for taking care of her story." I'm 72 now, and I still live on this land. The farmhouse is quieter than it used to be, but the barn is full of life, full of color and memory, and the ghosts of two people who loved fiercely and imperfectly. Apollo is still here, though he moves slower now, his muzzle gone gray. I know we don't have much time left together, but I'm grateful for every day. I've learned that love is complicated, that people are complicated, that you can be angry and grateful at the same time, heartbroken and whole, betrayed and blessed. Teddy kept secrets. So did Vivian. So do I. But their love, both of them, in their own ways, taught me that the human heart is big enough to hold contradictions, that honoring someone's truth doesn't mean erasing your own. I forgive Teddy. I forgive Vivian. And most importantly, I've forgiven myself for not knowing, for not asking, for accepting the easy version of our life instead of demanding the real one. The barn stands as a testament to everything they were, everything we all were. And sometimes, when the light hits just right through the skylight, I swear I can feel them both here. Teddy with his quiet steadiness, Vivian with her wild heart, reminding me that love doesn't end when people do. It just changes form, and that's enough. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the hidden chapters in your own life or the people you love, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your stories matter to me as much as mine matters to you. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And remember, everyone you meet is carrying a story you can't see. Treat them gently.